My wife cheated on me twice. I'll tell you everything in order. I met my wife in college. She's 3 years younger than me. I had just come back from the army. We fell deeply in love, and within 6 months, we decided to live together, rented an apartment, and started a rather modest student life. We lived in harmony, enjoying small pleasures, and we rarely argued or quarreled. Later, my parents helped us buy our first apartment, and after about 5 years of living together, finally started earning a more stable income while finishing my studies. I must note that throughout these 5 years, I was completely faithful to her. I didn't even flirt with anyone because I believed my wife didn't deserve such treatment. Everything in our domestic life was ideal. The apartment was always clean. My clothes were neatly kept, and she always cooked delicious meals. I had no suspicions of her being unfaithful either. She never flirted or did anything of that sort. However, I started interacting with a couple at work, going on outings to the countryside and visiting each other. Everything was typical for friends. One day, the girlfriend of my colleague asked me for a ride home after work. That's when I realized she had fallen for me. To be fair, I had already noticed that she liked me. She was a very beautiful woman, and I found her attention flattering. But I didn't give it much importance because I was firm in my decision not to cheat on my wife or get involved in minor temptations. Meanwhile, my workload increased significantly. I started working Saturdays and Sundays to furnish our apartment and provide for my wife. She, on the other hand, began spending more time with our friends, going to movies and parks without me. My colleague came from a wealthy family and didn't have to work as hard as I did. Around this time, his girlfriend again asked for a ride home, and on the way, she confessed her feelings for me, saying that her relationship with my colleague was on the brink of ending. She kissed me, and in the heat of the moment, something more happened in the car. I drove home immediately afterward, overwhelmed with guilt. I told her to keep quiet about it, and said there would be nothing more between us. Since then, I tried to avoid their company. My wife, however, continued to hang out with them. Later, I found out that the girl had quit her job and broken up with my colleague. This raised a question in my mind. If they weren't a couple anymore, who was my wife spending time with? When I asked her that evening, she told me she had been trying to reconcile them because she felt sorry for them. She claimed the guy wanted to win back his ex-girlfriend, so he asked her for advice. Something didn't sit right with me, so I decided to investigate. I called the ex-girlfriend, and she told me she had ended things with my colleague shortly after quitting her job, and hadn't been in contact with him since. She even asked me why my wife was still going to the movies with owing to him. This left me confused and suspicious. On one hand, I had committed my own mistake, but on the other hand, I couldn't ignore what was unfolding. When I confronted my wife and asked her to stop seeing my colleague, she reacted dramatically. Defending their friendship, she said she couldn't abandon him because he was suffering after being dumped. This shocked me and made me feel like a fool. It was as if horns had already started growing on my head. However, I wanted concrete proof before escalating things. I wasn't innocent myself after all. I started noticing suspicious behavior. My wife had password-protected all her social media accounts, though she used to let me browse them freely. Then I stumbled upon a message on her phone that confirmed my worst fears. Declarations of love, talks of butterflies in the stomach, and even discussions about how not to get pregnant after their last unprotected encounter. I was devastated. Her belongings and kicked her out. She didn't resist much and went to live with a friend. I also reached out to the ex-girlfriend of my colleague and told her everything, out of spite and to regain some sense of self-worth. I slept with her for 2 days straight, however. After a couple of weeks, I realized I didn't enjoy her company and sent her away. My anger toward my wife subsided, and I began to feel a deep longing for her. We eventually reconciled, and she moved back in. Things were never quite the same. She was distant, spent hours on social media, and showed little interest in maintaining the house or our relationship. Eventually, I discovered that she was still in touch with my colleague. After more digging, I found proof that their affair had continued. This time, I confronted my wife and decided to put an end to it all. I moved out and began living alone. We reconciled after some time. I couldn't look at her the same way again. Our relationship felt irreparably broken, and the thought of other possible affairs haunted me. I decided that once our child grew older, I would end things for good. After 10 years of marriage and 5 years since the first incident, life seemed to return to normal. We considered the earlier events as a life lesson, something never to be repeated, and focused on cherishing our relationship. I was earning well. My wife and child lacked nothing, and we even started planning for a better, bigger apartment, since our current one felt small and uncomfortable. Our son was born a year after we got married, and there was no doubt he was mine. He looked just like me. We traveled abroad often, not just to places like Turkey, but to far-off destinations. I bought my wife a car because managing groceries and errands with a child was difficult. I even sent her, along with her mother and our child, to the seaside for a month every summer so they wouldn't have to endure the stifling city heat. Life was blossoming, boating, nothing excessive, just like others. I was never a homebody, and drinking beer on Saturdays in front of the TV wasn't my thing. My wife also got out of maternity leave and began asking to return to work. She wasn't the type to sit at home for long. She was smart and ambitious, and she found a good job, becoming quite successful. After a year of her working, she started complaining about being overburdened and constantly tired. Work. A woman 10 years older than her with 3 marriages behind her. This friend also regularly cheated on her third husband. I didn't approve of this friendship, but decided to let it go. After all, I thought my wife had learned her lesson and wouldn't repeat past mistakes. Besides, her friend was polite and respectful toward me. Every evening, my wife would gush about how smart and amazing her friend was, how much she liked her, and how much she was learning from her. Eventually, she made a couple more friends at work, and one day they decided to meet outside of work on a Friday. She asked for my permission, explaining they'd be having wine and playing board games at one of the women's homes. I agreed. It seemed harmless. Work outings could be beneficial for bonding in an informal setting. That first outing ended with her coming home at 4, drunk, grumbling that these gatherings weren't for her and that she wouldn't go again. I scolded her for waking me and our son, but the incident was soon forgotten. After all, I also occasionally stayed late with colleagues, chatting over beer and snacks. But a nagging suspicion lingered. 4 in the morning was much later than what I'd be considered reasonable for such outings. My second red flag came when I returned from a long business trip, and she didn't meet me at the door. Previously, she would wait for me in the kitchen with a delicious meal, but this time, she didn't even come out of her room. Things escalated from there. Her attitude toward the home and our child became indifferent. Our son was practically living at my mother's house because my wife didn't have time to pick him up from daycare. She became obsessed with her appearance, fitness, tanning, expensive clothes, another work outing, another 4. Return. This time, she bombarded me with pictures of her playing cards with the girls to convince me of her innocence. However, her behavior reminded me too much of her actions 5 years earlier, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she had reconnected with the same guy. Her sly smile in the evenings when she returned from another room was unmistakable. Realized those were moments when she was texting her lover. One day, she left her phone on the bed, and I saw a message pop up. Good morning from some guy. When I confronted her, she brushed it off, claiming it was just a male colleague who was waiting on a work report. She had previously told me her team was all women. I sent her, along with my mother and our son, to Sochi for 3 weeks. While they were away, she barely called me. When I tried to reach her, she often sounded irritated, saying she was too busy to talk or complaining about how my mother was ruining her vacation. When they returned, we finally bought the large apartment we had always dreamed of. During the renovations, her notorious friend came to visit. My wife went outside to talk to her in the car, leaving her phone behind. Out of suspicion, I checked it and found a message from her to her colleague saying, "Good night." By the time I checked again that evening, the message had been deleted. That was the breaking point. I left home, unable to argue in front of our child. Later that evening, I called her and said I knew everything. She started with the usual denials, claiming the colleague was just pestering her. She didn't want to involve me because it would cause a scandal at work. But I had seen too much. I had seen too much. I pressed her further, revealing I had read messages about their sexual encounters. Her response was a long silence, followed by a short sorry. I was stupid. That admission shattered me. She had been having an affair with her colleague for 6 months while I was working hard to support her and renovate our new apartment. I went on a drinking binge, destroyed the guy's apartment with friends, and even paid him a visit to settle the score physically. He admitted that all their corporate meetings were actually at his place. He claimed she made the first move, showing up at his place under various pretexts. Eventually, I moved out and found someone new, but the story repeated itself. I went back to my wife, who cried and begged for forgiveness. Our son also cried, and her excuses were the usual ones. She claimed I didn't appreciate her enough. Despite everything, for over 1.5 years, I haven't been able to see her as anything but unfaithful. I feel stuck, unwilling to split our assets or disrupt my son's life. But I plan to end this once my son grows older. At times, I am haunted by the question, what if I only know about 2 of her affairs? What if there were others, simple flings or even more serious relationships, that I never discovered? This thought gnaws at me, and I can't shake the sense of betrayal. After everything, life has settled into an uneasy routine. I am still living with my wife for the sake of our son. He is at the center of my world, and I want to provide him with a stable family environment for as long as possible. I grew up in a broken home myself, and I know firsthand how damaging that can be. I don't want my son to suffer the same fate, but at the same time, I can't help but feel like I'm trapped in a situation that is slowly eating away at me. Over time, my wife has tried to make amends. She's more attentive now and works hard to show that she's dedicated to our family. On the surface, everything looks fine. We have a comfortable life, our son is well cared for, and we've even managed to save for the future. But deep down, the scars remain. I find it hard to trust her completely. And every time she smiles at her phone or mentions a new colleague, that old paranoia resurfaces. Some nights, I lie awake thinking about how things might have been different if she had been honest from the beginning. I wonder if I should have left her years ago when I first found out about her betrayal. Would I have first found out about her betrayal, found someone who truly values me, or would I have ended up alone, missing my family and regretting my decision? These thoughts are a constant weight on my mind. I try to channel my frustration into productive outlets, working harder, spending quality time with my son, and pursuing my hobbies. But no matter how much I try to distract myself, the doubts linger. I feel like I'm living a double life. Outwardly, I'm a devoted husband and father, but internally I'm consumed by anger, regret, and mistrust. My son is growing up fast, and I know the time is approaching when I'll need to make a decision. Staying in this marriage feels like a slow death, But leaving would mean upheaval for everyone, especially him. I keep telling myself that I'll wait until he's older, until he's better able to understand and cope with the situation. But part of me wonders if that's just an excuse, if I'm too afraid to take the leap and start over. Sometimes I catch myself wishing for something to force my hand, something that would make the decision clear. But nothing like that has happened yet, and so I continue to drift, caught between my sense of duty to my son and my desire to finally break free. For now, all I can do is wait and hope that time will bring clarity. I don't know what the future holds, but one thing is certain. I will do whatever it takes to protect my son and give him the life he deserves, even if it means sacrificing my own happiness.